So hello, my name is Scot Hurst. I'm the Assistant Curator of Arms and Armour here at the Royal Armouries. Today I am joined by a Kia Gunto. This is Up in Arms. So for the past 70-ish years, samurai swords, or Japanese swords more correctly, particularly things like the iconic katana, have been well and truly cemented within the popular imagination, pop culture, as a result of decades of films, Hollywood films, the films of Akira Kurosawa, for example, comic books, video games, TV. These things are absolutely everywhere. If you speak to someone randomly on the street and mention samurai swords, they will know exactly what you're talking about. So today I want to talk about probably my favorite Japanese sword in the entire Royal Armouries collection, but it is a little bit different. It's not your traditional or stereotypical katana by any stretch of the imagination. And that's what makes it so interesting. So this is, as I mentioned, a Kia Gunto. So what is a Kia Gunto? Where did they come from? How did they come about? Well, the story of the Kia Gunto really starts with the Meiji Restoration in the 1860s. So this was essentially a transition of power away from the Tokugawa shogunate, who had essentially ruled Japan as military dictators since 1603. So power started to transition away from the shogunate and back towards the emperor. Now, prior to this, the emperor was basically a ceremonial, spiritual, religious figurehead, but he had very little real political or military power influence at all. Real power, as I say, lay in the hands of the shogun. So power transitioned to the emperor. This triggered a huge cultural shift in Japan, a move towards not just modernity, but also westernization. So eventually this led to the slow erosion and eventual dissolution of the samurai class in Japan. So further to this, in 1876, there is something called the Hitori Edict, which basically banned the carrying of swords, which was a huge fundamental change for Japan. So following this edict, only the old lords, or the daimyos, the police and military could carry swords. This basically meant that the swordsmiths of Japan, who had been plying their trade for centuries, were pretty much out of business. Many of them turned to the manufacture of cutlery or more general blacksmithing to maintain a living. But swordsmithing in Japan was in terminal decline from this point onwards. So Japan was seeking to modernize in all spheres: culture, fashion, and of course, the military as well. They were desperate not to be left behind or dominated by the Western powers. And so inevitably they sought to not just modernize, but westernize. In fact, they based their army upon what was deemed to be by them the most powerful military force in the world at the time, the French, and they modeled their navy upon the most powerful naval force of the time, the British. So as Japan set about modernizing its armed forces, its army and navy, it soon became clear that there were two problems. They simply did not have enough of the expertise left over following the Hitori Edict to produce high quality, high quantity of swords, but also the traditional methods of sword making, again, would not produce the uniformity of sword or the quantity and quality of sword that were required for the modern army. And so Japan turned to more modern industrialized methods of mass production, producing blades that were, yes, produced very quickly, but of a relatively poor quality. And indeed, at the time, there were lots of complaints from officers who were not satisfied with the quality of their blade. They were found to be too flexible and often shattered. So the first real attempt at a modern military mass-produced blade of a set standard and pattern, was the Kyogunto. And as you can see, it does resemble a European style sword very closely. So the scabbard, the sire, is of a wood-lined metal body with a drag and a suspension loop. Now actually this should have had a second one, but these were detachable, and quite commonly they are lost, as in this case. So there should have been two. And if we look at the hilt of the weapon, we see that, again, there's a strong French influence. We do have the traditional Japanese ray-skin grip, or same. The arrangement is also secured in place by the traditional bamboo peg that we find on all other kinds of Japanese swords. But when we look at the back strap, which is of gilded brass, we have the knuckle guard and the handguard. These are all strongly influenced by European design. But there is that little nod to Japanese tradition. We have on the rear the lotus flower, lotus leaf, appearing several times. So we do have that nod to Japanese tradition. So what about the blade? Well, this is where things get very interesting indeed. So as I've said, the blades that were being mass-produced in Japan were not especially good. But there was an option available to officers should they choose or have the available resources. So while there were regulations governing the scabbard, the hilt, the blade itself could be replaced entirely. So if we carefully remove the scabbard, so what you could do is remove your military blade and replace it with an ancestral, traditionally forged Japanese blade, be it a katana, tachi, wakizashi, whatever. So while the Kyogunto was introduced in the late 19th century, this blade is actually late 13th century. So this is a stunningly beautiful blade. The state of preservation is absolutely mind-boggling. So we are able to date this blade based upon the features present. So unfortunately, it isn't signed. That's usually the first way that we try to identify Japanese blades. The smith would often sign the tang quite commonly with his name, where he was working, the school that he worked in, the date, other gruesome details such as how many corpses the blade had been tested against, things like that. But in this case, there's nothing on the tang of the blade at all. So all we had to go on was the characteristics of the blade itself, primarily the hamon. So what's the hamon? Basically, I'm not sure you'll see this on camera, but there is a wavy line along the edge of the blade itself. This is the hamon, and this is the result of what we call differential quenching or differential cooling of the blade itself during the manufacturing or smithing process. Now, this video is by no means long enough to go into the minutiae of the construction, the manufacture of Japanese blades, but I'll run through this key little process. So when you're working with steel, there is a bit of a problem, and this problem is being faced by everyone around the world who has ever tried to make a sharp blade. You can make it super hard, but it will be very brittle, prone to breaking, smashing. Or you can make it soft, in which case it will take an impact, it will be shatter resistant, but it's almost impossible to get a keen, sharp cutting edge on that blade. So you need to try and find a balance. So the solution found by Japanese smiths essentially is to combine hard iron, or steel, with soft. So the back of the blade was often of a softer quality, while the edge, which was often welded on, was of hard steel. And what they would do is coat the back of the blade in a clay solution. So when the sword was quenched in warm water, the edge is allowed to cool much more quickly, whereas the back cools more slowly. So what this achieves is a very hard edge with your superb cutting edge, whereas the back is softer. You have a soft core capable of taking those percussive blows without shattering completely. So why is all this important? Why am I rabbiting on about hamon? Well, basically, smiths would often apply the clay in a very particular pattern, and this would often be peculiar to themselves or even to the school that they belong to. So if you have a very trained eye, which I do not, but there are people out there who can look at the pattern of the hamon, and they will be able to tell you who made the blade and where. So the blade has been assessed, and based on the hamon, it has been ascribed to the Rai school, with the most likely smith being Kunitoshi. So considering that this blade is a family heirloom, something very precious indeed, considering its age, considering the quality of the workmanship, why on earth would the officer who was issued this Kyogunto put this blade in his military service weapon? Well, it comes down to a cultural and spiritual factor. So as Tokugawa Ieyasu once said, the soul of the samurai is the katana, is the sword. So in a very real sense, this is a portable shrine to the ancestors of the individual who owned the Kyogunto. The soul of the samurai is believed to reside within the blade itself. So when you take this to war, you are not just carrying your ancestor's blade, you're carrying your ancestors with you as well. And there is no greater honor for a descendant of a samurai family than to carry your ancestors with you to war once more. So this is the Kyogunto, 13th century ancestral blade. Hands down, my favorite Japanese sword in the entire collection. So thanks again for watching. This has been another thrilling episode of Up in Arms. I hope you've enjoyed. The Royal Armouries is a charitable organisation, so if you are able, if you are willing, please do feel free to donate to the museum. It enables us to continue the great work that we do. If not, please like, subscribe, mention your favourite objects in the comments, give us suggestions, let us know what you want to see next, and hopefully I will see you again soon. Thank you very much.